everyone. This is David Rasnick of Radio Free Science. Celia Farber is in Norway, and we're trying to get a connection with her there. I hope we're able to make that soon. And our guest today is Clark Baker. He's the director of the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice based down in Los Angeles. He's put together a team of lawyers, physicians, and scientists to basically help people in the area of HIV/AIDS right now. All these clinical prosecutions that are taking place in Canada and the United States and other countries, where if people have antibodies to HIV, in some cases, it depends on the state. For example, I think there's 38 states in the United States that have criminal laws against having HIV-positive people having unprotected sex with others, and especially if they do not inform their sexual partners that they have these antibodies to HIV. This is a serious problem because I think the one individual that I know was at risk of spending 37 years in prison if he had been found guilty. This was a court-martial case in North Carolina, and I think if we're able to get Clark. Celia, I think you may be there with us. Is that right?
I'm here, and it is 9 o'clock in the evening where I am, but it's still light out like daytime. I'm in Stavanger, Norway, and my connection to this town actually has a bearing on the theme of our show tonight, and I'll get to that later. I don't know if you told our listeners what we're going to be talking about yet or who's going to be with us.
I mentioned Clark and OMSJ.
Yeah, well, we're going to be talking about HIV, and we've talked about it before, but it's a big and growing story about what's happening in HIV criminal law and how it's being busted up and rewritten, very much thanks to the intrepid efforts of Clark Baker and OMSJ, and it suddenly hit me. We haven't interviewed Clark on this show, so he agreed to join us. And he'll be joining us in a few moments. But Dave, are you at liberty to tell us about the case that you were involved in recently on the East Coast? I think it was about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I haven't been advised one way or the other, but I don't probably shouldn't mention names. But there was a lieutenant colonel in the Army who was being court-martialed for he was HIV positive, had antibodies to HIV, and I'm not absolutely certain of the wording, but it was considered, I guess, assault with grievous bodily harm. When we're able to get him, he knows the particulars of this in the proper legal language. And
right.
If he had been convicted under the very harsh charges, I mean, he could spend many, many years in prison.
Right.
And I don't know all of the details. I was there. I testified as an expert witness on the ELISA and the Western blot test for antibodies to HIV, and primarily because the other expert witnesses that Clark typically uses were out of the country and were not available, so I was sort of the B team, But this was the first criminal trial that I've ever testified in, and it happened to be a court-martial, which made it especially interesting because the rules in a court-martial are very different than they are in a civilian court. I must say that it took a lot longer than we thought it would. I'm just getting an email from Clark. I'm not sure if he knows the call.
Tell Clark we're on the case. We're all getting connected.
Okay, I will do that, and I'll give him the call-in phone number because he's probably going to have to call in, I guess.
It's okay. The engineer has Clark's information, and he's going to be plugging Clark in to join us momentarily.
Okay,
but let's
good.
pull back a little bit and give me your sense of the bigger picture. Did you feel in this? And I asked the same thing of David Steele when he was on, and then since then you've been in one of these courtrooms. Did you feel that there was an awakening to the deep, tragic, I don't want to say problems, but let's just use that word for now. The problems with the HIV test, which is the big. That's the place we've all been trying to get to for so many years, right?
Yeah, I think so. That's the beauty of a trial. People have to testify under oath, and they can't slip out of that very easily. Where in the scientific journals, all you have to do is just not publish your paper or ignore you and don't fund you to do your work. But in a courtroom, everybody on that witness stand is basically equal. You have to swear in, and you have to, under risk of perjury, you have to answer the questions to the best of your ability. And for my only experience in this is that the arguments that our side were really affected it was a single judge. It was not a jury. It was just a judge that was hearing the case and would make the decision. And yes, he asked some very good questions of the prosecution witnesses about their test that I thought, man, I could have asked those questions. They were so good. And after my testimony, I was told by the defendant's attorney, and I was a witness for the defendant, that the two of the three prosecuting attorneys complimented me on my testimony. Now, I think that's pretty unusual. They didn't tell me to my face, but I explained to them what the ELISA really did and the Western blot and the limitations that are acknowledged in the inserts that come with those tests, and what it would take in order for those tests to have any meaning whatever in terms of a person being infected with HIV, and not only that, whether or not having these antibodies have anything to do with HIV at all. And those information comes directly from the inserts on these tests, that there's no accepted reference standard to determine whether or not the antibodies that they actually detect have anything to do with HIV. So it's not just my interpretation. That's what it says in the ELISA and the Western blot tests themselves. So that came pretty clearly, I think, out in the process of testimony. The judge seemed to catch on to this really quick. One thing that was new to me, I've been studying this AIDS stuff now for 3 decades, and during that trial, this is the first time I heard of this thing called their test algorithm, where they have no, you can't use the ELISA test to diagnose HIV infection. You can't use the Western blot to diagnose HIV infection. You can't use the viral load to diagnose HIV infection. And yet these people claim now they have this algorithm where if you take if both the ELISA test and the Western blot test are both positive, either one of which is not sufficient and not even indicated to diagnose a person with HIV, but both of these two things together they use as definitive proof that a person is infected with HIV, and there's no way to get around that algorithm by their own definition. One of the attorneys, the prosecuting attorneys, kept hammering away at people, the defense attorneys, defense witnesses, and the prosecution witnesses. Do you know of any HIV negative person who has all 9 bands positive on the Western blot? And of course, everybody says, it might be 1 chance in 1 million or 10 million or something like that. But the way the algorithm is designed, here I am a witness for the defense, and I said, no, it would have to be 0. There cannot be an HIV negative, a person infected with not infected with HIV who has these 9 bands, because the 9 bands are used to make that determination that you're HIV positive. You see, it's sort of a circular circular argument. And then I think certainly the judge and even the prosecuting attorneys realized that there was some serious problem here with the circular definition of using these tests to label somebody HIV positive. Are we still on air?
I don't know if we are or not.
Celia, are you there? No, she's in. Probably being in Norway, we might have lost the signal.
Yeah, we might have.
Yeah. So I guess you guys are trying to get there again.
We just stay on the line here until the engineer gets reconnects. This isn't being done live, is it?
Yeah, this is live. Yeah, I understand we have a problem with these connections in Norway and Southern California. I'm here in Northern California.
Okay. Can you try to?
I hear Celia.
Yeah.
Now you hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So Celia, I just went on and on and on about this.
No,
my testimony.
Heard you.
You heard it. Okay, all right.
I was totally with you. Yes.
Okay, good.
I was with you all the way, and what I wanted to say was this: is if somebody is hearing this for the very first time, and we were to start as simply as we possibly can. This isn't for my comfort, but for somebody listening in for the first time, Dave, I want you to answer this first. What is the HIV testing for, really? No, let me put that differently. Hold on for a second. We call it the AIDS test, never mind HIV test. People actually call it an AIDS test. So when a poor, terrified person goes and sits in that clinic or gets that phone call, and they think they're being tested for a virus they have or do not have, what is in fact happening with that test? Well,
the first thing is that there is no such thing as a test for HIV. It does not exist. There's no diagnostic test for HIV.
Stop right there. You have to tell us why not. Why not?
Yeah. Because the manufacturers of all these tests acknowledge that, and they have the disclaimer in the tests themselves. It's a misnomer to say that there is an HIV test. It's basically a misnomer, and this is where this disingenuous behavior is rampant throughout the medical profession, the health profession in general, where they allow people to call these things HIV tests, and they are not HIV tests. In fact, in the trial the court-martial that I testified at, I made this point explicitly, and I talked with the prosecuting attorneys and others. That's what you can do in a court-martial before you even testify. And nobody ever disputed the fact that none of these tests are tests for HIV. That's why they came up with this weird thing that I only learned about at that trial of this algorithm, where you take these 2 or 3 tests, the ELISA, the Western blot, and the PCR viral load test, and if they all come back saying the same thing, then you must be HIV positive. The logic of that, which I pointed out in my testimony, implies that if you have 2 or 3 liars saying the same thing, that it must be true. That's the logic that they're using.
Yeah.
And the judge, resonated, with that. I mean, got that right off. Everybody did, including the prosecuting attorneys, understood that principle really quickly.
I'm pretty sure we have Clark Baker on the line. I'm going to assume that's the case. Welcome, Clark. Yay, there he is.
Hi, Clark. Both.
Great to hear your voice. And like I said, I just sort of slapped my forehead and I said, we're inside this thing. We're inside this strange spacecraft called deconstructing AIDS science. All of us have been, for varying degrees of, we have different, sentences, I would almost call it, because once you're inside it, it's very hard to get out. And but I think it's getting fun now. It's getting really interesting now because, Clark, you've entered the fray and you've done something nobody did before, which is take it to the courts. And I want you to just share with us, before we go, micro and detailed, just what's your sense of how these last few cases that you guys, OMSJ, have been fighting, how is the spirit feel to you around this whole issue of HIV, the test, and criminality?
Well, as the relative newcomer in this, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a journalist, and I understand very little about biochemistry and human physiology, except what I've learned empirically after school and professionally. But I do understand criminal behavior. And what is the most fascinating aspect of all of this, especially as we got involved in criminal, civil, and military HIV cases, is the behavior of people who receive millions of dollars in funding from the NIH. They behave just like any criminal who lies and denies when caught, but they, at the same time, these government officials, these individuals, the witnesses who ostensibly are HIV experts, they're deaf when it comes to understanding what their behavior looks like. It's the analogy I've used is that these people behave like chocolate-faced 5-year-olds who deny knowledge about the missing chocolate chip cookies. They're obvious, but clueless as to what their behaviors tell us. I got involved in these criminal HIV cases, as you know, because the NIH and the CDC refused to answer simple questions that I had for them. And what I typically did, I like paper trails, so I sent emails to these agencies, and the agencies typically reply through a third-party social marketing website like air.org and others, and those organizations simply provide links to part of the shell games, and the shell game is a series of websites and documents that all assume that HIV attacks cells and causes AIDS. And when you go back to the U.S. government websites and you scroll down to the bottom where it says disclaimer, the disclaimers all say basically don't trust what third-party websites tell you. And so they contract, those U.S. government agencies are contracting with social marketing websites and organizations that the government themselves absolve liability with regards to what those third-party websites say. So you can't get a straight answer. And when you press them hard enough and long enough, they eventually say, well, go ask your doctor. Well, where do you think your doctor gets his information? So it's a shell game, and when you press the individuals about the shell game, they behave just like drug dealers who try to explain how they are driving around with a $200,000 Maserati. They behave the same way.
Okay, now for the benefit of our listeners who are new to this morass, and I just want to quote our beloved departed Serge Lang of Yale University, legendary mathematician, who often said, "How do you address a morass without becoming part of it?" And it's kind of implicit in the question. So our morass, HIV/AIDS, is HIV an entity? Is it a unique? Is it an actual? Does it have a body? Is it a virus? Has it been isolated? Okay, if all those things were clear, then there should be a clear test that tests for the presence or absence of it. Right. This is where it gets really strange. This is the matrix, I guess. And after 26 years of being involved in this morass, reporting about it, and all kinds of persecutions and floggings and, all that stuff you were describing as rightly so, I think, criminal behavior of guilty people, I still find that it's difficult to explain in linear English what the problem with the HIV test is, because it shouldn't be called the HIV test, because that supposes there is an HIV and there is a test and there's something wrong with the test. But that's not the case. It's more abstract still. Dave, you once called it a Frankenstein virus, meaning, and you once said something to this effect in an interview with me years ago, that it has been, that it is partly, maybe even wholly composed of HIV. That is, it's a construct that comes into existence through the technologies that were invented and patented to see it. Is that accurate, what I just said?
Yeah, I can tell you what I meant by that. The only place where I'm convinced as a scientist that HIV exists is in the laboratory. And for the simple reason that the HIV in the laboratories are synthesized. They're synthetic. I had a friend at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, in his team who used to synthesize these various viruses. Lawrence Los Alamos National Laboratory has a website where they catalog all the genetic variants that keep coming in on HIV, and there are over 400,000 genetically distinct varieties of HIV, and yet there are only just a little over 9,000 nucleotides or letters that make up HIV. So you can see that it's meaningless, except in terms of anything real. I'm not one of these people that says HIV does not exist. It definitely exists. It exists in the laboratory. It's synthesized. They make it and they put a label on the bottle that says it's HIV. So by definition, that's HIV. What you don't find, though, is that HIV in human beings. You don't find it in human beings, so it only exists in the laboratory.
So it really is a genuine laboratory post-technological artifact.
I think so, yes.
That means, in other words, if we're not looking for it with the machines built to find it, it does not exist. It doesn't have its own existence as an organic
It certainly
entity.
does not exist in any human being because there's no evidence that it does.
Right, because if it did, they would have a test that did not say, as all HIV tests do, as well as viral load tests, they all say, and let's have the sentence because you probably know it verbatim by now, this test cannot finish that sentence.
None of these tests can be used to diagnose HIV infection or even antibodies to HIV. Believe it or not, the ELISA tests say that. They have no idea if the antibody positive reaction is actually due to the presence of HIV eliciting those antibodies. They don't know.
Good Lord. This is no minor mistake here we're talking about. We're going to go shortly to break. We're all in different parts of the world, and this is all a miracle.
a quick suggestion. I suggest that Clark give us sort of the history and the scope of OMSJ when we get back.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, we really want to hear about the victories, because we've had a lot of losses. We've had a lot of setbacks, and there's been an atmosphere of more or less doom for many, many years, because no matter, the more you try to make sense of things, the more the violence increased, the more people were just taken out of their professions, journalists snuffed out, this kind of thing. So it's like a Prague Spring feeling that I'm having here about this whole issue. And when we come back, we're going to put the spotlight on Clark Baker. He's going to tell us what's been going on in these courtrooms. And then I'm going to tell you all a very heart-rending story about somebody who you're going to hear more about in the near future. I'm Celia Farber. We'll be right back. We're back. I want to thank our engineer, our really hard-working engineer, Matt, who has, especially for this show, just really had to juggle immensely to put us all together. And I don't know why I couldn't be obedient and just stay in New York and show up in the studio, but I had to turn up in Norway and make everything difficult. But I'm half Swedish, and I grew up in Sweden, and so I go home from time to time. And because I was in Sweden, I was very close to Norway and somebody I'd been wanting to meet for a long time. And I'm just going to share this with everybody, and then we're going to turn to Clark and the OMSJ cases. But this, I hope, will really bring it home for whoever may be still scratching their heads and wondering, what's all this about algorithms? I don't understand. So I just want to make it very, very crystal clear. Let's turn to, okay, I'm going to tell you the story from a side angle. I was on the train yesterday traveling from Oslo to Stavanger, where I am now, which is in the western part of Norway. And somebody in Sweden, the daughter of a good friend, was in Sweden for about a week before I set out for Norway. And they know what I've been involved in. And this young woman said, "Have you heard about the case of the HIV mother?" In Swedish, they call her HIV-mamman. And she's known all across the country. She's the mother of two girls, and her story went like this. She was 19 years old, perfectly healthy. She had been in Paris, I think, as an au pair, and at the height of AIDS fear and terror, she had an HIV test, so-called, and it came back positive. Now, this young lady just threw it out of her mind. She just said, I'm not going to let that into my psyche. I'm not going to tell a soul. And that's what she did. And she kept it secret, and she just went on about her life. She never got sick. She never developed a single symptom. She got married, and she had two beautiful girls. And she never told her husband. She never told her children. But the thing didn't go away. It was lying there, creating the havoc that this thing creates. Even if it turns out there is nothing there, no thing, nothing. It's a void, nothing. We have all created this thing that does exist, which is a very powerful belief that one is marked for death and doomed. And this woman, it's such an incredible story. What happened was there are very powerful anonymity laws around HIV in Sweden, and nobody was allowed to tell. In other words, it wasn't this kind of thing like we have in the States where the doctors have to call up everybody she's ever been with. It's different in Sweden. So it went on for quite a long time, and she was actually really happily married. Again, she's still healthy. Everybody's healthy. Everybody's happy. But then the thing slips out, and somehow or other, she wound up in a situation where some doctor blew the whistle on her, and she had to tell her husband. So she told her husband, and at first he was loving and put his arms around her and said, "We'll get through this." But then the destruction of this thing, got into him, and he turned against her, and he filed criminal charges eventually against her. The law in Sweden, I guess, is kind of like in the States. It's something called the infection information law or something, where she had an obligation to tell him, according to Swedish law. He was not HIV positive, nothing. So she actually went to prison for 2 years. She lost custody of her kids. He got the kids. And now she's beginning to talk about this. There's a documentary about her that I haven't seen. It's in Swedish, and it's called Hur kunde hon in Swedish, which means how could she, which I think is an unfortunate title, doesn't fill me with hope about this documentary. But I looked her up, and I was traveling on this train to visit a woman in Norway with an unbelievably similar story, and I'm in her living room right now. That's where I'm doing this interview. Her name is Lena Hofstad, and she's one of my favorite people in the world. In the future, I've got her to promise she'll come on our show, but not tonight. Lena, and I'll wrap this up quickly. Many involved in the AIDS fight may know her name. She had a boyfriend who was not a very nice guy. He was, I won't go into the details, but he's on record as having committed extreme violence against her. And we're not allowed to know his name or say his name. He's very protected by all kinds of laws. And he turned around, rather than face criminal charges for what he had done to her, he turned around and filed charges against her. Now, she was told, along with her then husband, who is from Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa, she was told by Norwegian authorities that she had to get tested for HIV, and so did he, because he was in a risk group, being from Africa. So they got tested. She was 8 months pregnant with her daughter, a beautiful daughter who's now 25. And lo and behold, it comes back. You're both positive for what they said was HIV-2, right? HIV-2, none of us talk about much, but it's supposedly a strain of HIV that's less aggressive and less terrible and is predominant in West Africa. So they're told this terrible news, and Lena, like this other woman I was telling you about in Sweden, she also just didn't really take it on board. She just went on about her life. She was healthy. She was happy. She was raising her daughter. Everything was fine until many, many, many years later. They got divorced, and this man went off to live in France, and he has a total of 6 children, this supposedly HIV-2 positive man. He has 6 children who are HIV negative. His new wife is HIV negative. So, this whole thing obviously isn't adding up. What happened to Lena is I want everybody to understand that this is why we fight. This woman was charged by this, admitted, he's, all right, I'll just say it. He almost killed her. That's the long and the short of it, okay? And this is the police and everything were there, and this is on record. And instead he turns around and he accuses her of this absurd thing of what he accused her of specifically was not telling him that she was HIV positive. So she's charged, she's put through all kinds of hell. She's got this just a total, a rigged trial, and they send her to jail, and she was in jail for 2 years, and by then she'd been positive, quote unquote, since 1987. She's sent to prison in 2008, and then for the first time when she's in prison and she's lost everything, then she gets sick with pneumonia. Not surprising. She's sitting here and she's healthy. She's wonderful. She's fighting. She's coming back. It takes a lot to come back from this kind of absolute hell. But I want to just, these 2 women, the Swedish woman and one in Sweden, one in Norway, they're like, they could be sisters for what they went through. And they are both I don't know how to say this other than to say what has come to me as I'm living here with me. Lena just, I just got here yesterday and I'm in her apartment and I'm talking to her and we talk about our hopes and our dreams and she's a wonderful and I dare I say ordinary woman. I mean that in the best possible sense. And she was depicted as a monster in this trial, and the other woman is also depicted as a monster. So you get what I'm talking about. I will wrap it up. This is something so destructive. It's as destructive as the witch hunts, where all it took was the pointing of the finger, like Arthur Miller pointed out in The Crucible, that when you point the finger and all the fear, everything is ready. The whole system is already rigged. You just point and somebody's going to go down, and it's going to be these are totally innocent people in prison all over the world over nothing. And we've got to turn
something perfect for OMSJ.
Well, I'm glad you said that, and maybe we don't want to put Clark on the spot right here on the air, but I really hope that OMSJ brings its fire and thunder to other parts of the world. Clark, I'll be quiet now.
Well, I think we need most people have never heard of OMSJ, and I think this is a good opportunity for Clark to tell us why it came about, what it does, what it's accomplished.
Well,
great idea.
The story that you've told us, I hear these stories just about every day. As we continue to win these criminal HIV cases, more and more people are contacting me. There's a young girl, 23 years old. I won't mention her city or her state. She's a black girl, healthy, beautiful. Came from a low-income family, and she, for certain reasons, tested at a local clinic that targets black people, and she tested positive. And the news, I mean, she's an innocent, beautiful, intelligent young girl who at 16 is told you've got this, you met somebody who's given you this terrible death sentence, you're going to die, and she attempted suicide at least twice over this news, and then when she and we're going to post the story at omsj.org in the next few days, and people who read the story can contact her through the comments of the story. But we get these stories all the time, and this what you described is very typical. A lot of people tested positive years ago when they were young, they were healthy, and asymptomatic, and they knew that there was something wrong with the tests, and they go about their life happily and free until if you're a young woman and you get pregnant and you see your doctor and your doctor checks the HIV registries and your name is on it and says, well, we've got to give this rat poison to your unborn baby to protect from transmission. And if the mother says no, then she's reported to the health department, which then takes action. Child Services takes action to remove the children from the mother. And it's strange that a woman has the right to kill her baby through abortion, and nobody says a word. But if the woman wants to, questions a diagnosis that makes absolutely no sense, she suddenly becomes the monster, and they get incarcerated, they lose their children, they lose their freedom. I got involved in these cases.
It's totally ghastly what's going on.
Yeah, it is. And I got involved, I get no joy from questioning the ethical and moral attributes of my government. I'm a former Marine. I served 6 years in the Marine Corps, 3.5 overseas. I had a top secret clearance when I served with them. I served 20 years with the Los Angeles Police Department, and I grew up with all of the ideas that my country was far beyond anything as genocidal and corrupt as what I found as a licensed investigator. And when I started asking these questions with the NIH and the CDC, and I built a case that I thought could be pursued by law enforcement, I presented it to law enforcement, and local, state, and federal law enforcement don't do anything about it either. So that's why I created OMSJ. I got involved. OMSJ got involved in criminal HIV cases because the NIH and the CDC refused to answer questions, and I thought, well, gee, if they won't answer questions, let me get these prosecution HIV experts on the stand to testify under oath, under penalty of perjury, about the things that the NIH and the CDC refused to answer. And even though I suspected that we would win a few cases, this October, the HIV Innocence Group will have been up for 3 years, and we have prevailed. We've forced prosecutors to dismiss or plea bargain dozens of cases in less than 3 years, which is extraordinary. And even in some of our convictions, like the latest case where the judge prevented us from giving us enough time to get our experts together. Our experts were very busy. They had just gotten finished with another big case that we had, where the military defendant had been acquitted of all charges. But even in this most recent case in Washington, D.C., where there was a conviction, the biggest charge was aggravated assault with great bodily injury, and yet he was only sentenced to a year and will probably be out in 10 months. And now, aggravated assault with great bodily injury is tantamount to me deliberately getting into a car and deliberately running over someone who ends up sucking straws and being crippled for life. That is aggravated assault with great bodily injury. Even if, despite the fact that we got that our client was convicted, the fact that he was sentenced to only 10 months or 12 months in prison suggests that even the judge who convicted him knew that there was something amiss. And
Absolutely.
So that's how we got involved in these cases and why we got involved in these cases.
I want to ask you right here live on the air, just to make this very vivid for people. Lena and I stayed up until 3 a.m. talking, and we're talking about how to really come back from this. And let me just tell you this about her case. Not only did they put her in prison and crush her soul and begin to destroy her health, not crush her soul, you know what I mean, temporarily crush her soul. She's coming back. But they also pinned her with a fine so that this son of a bitch who almost killed her, she has to pay him the sentence, it's, what did we say, 60,500 euros, which, according to Lena's calculations, we made this before the show, is about $80,500. So she is now in debt. And we've talked about her life and her dreams from all angles. The more she works now, the more she has to pay. She's going to be in debt to this guy for I don't know how long. First of all, and he's walking around free, and he's taken all this money and started a new business and started a new life, and it makes my blood boil. And I want to get her retested, and first of all, none of these people have produced an HIV test for her ever. She's subpoenaed in the clinic. First, nobody has any paperwork, which I think is very suspicious. Okay. And first of all, and second of all, what is this HIV 2? Can either of you address address that. No, actually, let me remove that question from the table. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not so important right now. I think Clark could immediately address the consistent problems of people not showing up paperwork.
This is important. I'm sorry I'm being belligerent. But this is important. I have a really specific question, even if it took me a little while to get to it. Clark, what can Lena do? Or should she just drop it and go on with her life? What recourse does she have? All of this is said and done. OMSJ didn't exist when this happened to her. Lena and everybody else in a similar, God forbid, situation, what should they do in their country? What should they do? Sue the clinic? What's the answer? Where does it?
I don't know what the laws are in Norway, and so the first step would be to find an attorney who understands the issues, who can represent her, because there's really nothing that OMSJ as an American investigative agency can do. We have no jurisdiction there, and we frankly don't have the time, energy, or resources to go to law school and help her. So she needs to find an attorney to see if she has a case. Now,
but wait a minute. You've invalidated the HIV test in U.S. military courts. Why can't that be translated to everybody so that why can't it go around the world?
It can. And we just created, it's not online yet. We do have some information about it. But we created what we call Operation Letterhead, in which we assist people like her to draft letters. We draft letters for them on their that they sign and deliver as their own, that question the doctor who allegedly made the diagnosis, and we ask them exactly how did you diagnose me, and how did you do this, and if the doctor is unable to clearly describe exactly how the diagnosis was conducted, how he or she was found infected with this alleged virus, then at some point the doctor will try to dismiss the patient and send the patient elsewhere. Well, that isn't what credible, competent doctors do. Any patient, whether the patient is sick with the flu or with cancer, has a right to know exactly what their diagnosis is. And if the doctor refuses to say or is unable to say, the patient must assume that the doctor is incompetent. So at that point, that removes, in the United States, the statute typically has the requirement of knowledge. You have to know that you're infected with a transmittable virus. The paper trail between you and your physician, it nullifies, it brings into question whether or not there was sufficient knowledge to corroborate an infection. And at least in the United States, where these laws are written in this way, the fact that the person has reasonable doubt because the doctor couldn't answer the competent questions would lift that knowledge that would prevent the doctor from, or would prevent or make it difficult for prosecutors to prove that this person had knowledge, especially when the doctor can't answer the questions that are clearly written on in these letters. Also, the correspondence that should be mailed, return receipt, so that the patient knows that the doctor received the document. A competent doctor is required to place that correspondence in the medical record as part of the patient's permanent medical record. So
right. So it is very suspicious that Lena's tests aren't in her record.
That's right. But you have to ask the doctor. What typically happens is that Doctor 1 or Clinic 1 tests the individual. The tests come back and say, "Gosh, you're HIV positive. Let me send you to Doctor 2, who is an HIV expert." Well, Doctor 2 then gets the notification that this person has been diagnosed. And Dr. 2 presumes that Dr. 1 conducted the diagnosis, and Dr. 1 presumes that Dr. 2 will conduct the diagnosis, when in fact none of them. And this is consistent in every military, civil, and criminal case that we've been involved in. Dr. 1 has no clue and simply assumes that Dr. 2 will know what he's doing.
Stop right there. We're going to bring you back, maybe even next Friday. What do you say? Will you come back next Friday?
I'm at your disposal.
Wonderful. We'll be back next Friday, everybody. I'm Celia Farber. You've been listening to Radio Free Science on the Progressive Radio Network. Have a wonderful weekend.